webinar will be recorded and will be shared online afterwards. So if you would not like to be on the recording, please, you can stay, you can be a silent listener, and if you have any questions, ask them afterwards, but so that you're just aware that we're recording this webinar to be shared afterwards. For any questions that you come up with during the webinar, feel free to type them into our chat, and that way we'll be able to sort of look at them beforehand and address them during the Q&A session. And also, just as a heads up, we'll be using the poll and whiteboard functions of Skype for Business. For those who don't know what that is, you'll see that in a minute. But basically, it'll give you a chance to sort of give us some input in a written form. So there'll be some typing involved as well in this webinar. All right. So my name is Sunmin Kim. I work for the Extractors for Development program at GIZ. Our main role is to advise the German Federal Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development on resource governance questions. The ministry is also represented as a board member in the EITI board. And so we wanted to sort of address two main questions today. Sorry, I heard some background noise and I just wanted to check. So it's been about almost a year since the 2019 EITI standard was adopted last year at the EITI conference in Paris. And one of the novelties of that standard being the inclusion of new requirements on environmental reporting. Environmental reporting is not entirely a new practice. Some of the countries that are implementing countries were already publishing data and information on environmental questions in the mining sector. It is also part of a larger drive and push for companies and other stakeholders to disclose data that are sometimes also non-financial on environmental aspects. And so for us, we want to take this opportunity to hear from you how the requirement within the EITI's 2019 standard has worked for you within the past year. What were some of the challenges, but also experiences? And for that, we want to dive into two specific country cases today, the Philippines and Peru, which will be presented by Cielo Magno and Cesar Gamboa, both board members and representatives of the civil society stakeholder group. Before we dive into these country cases, we will have Olesia Toloshko from the EITI Secretariat, who will walk us through and refresh our memories of the requirement, look at them also in the relevance in light of the current COVID pandemic, and speak to us about the guidance note that the EITI Secretariat is planning to develop this year on this specific requirement. So the second objective for this webinar for us will be also to get your input on what are some of the things that should be covered within this guidance note. And so we'll have some time dedicated towards the end to collect your input on this. So without further ado, I will hand over to Olesia. Go.
Hi, can you hear me? Okay. Yes, so my name is Olesia Tolochko, and I'm working as a country officer at the EITI International Secretariat, and I'm also supporting the policy team on the environmental disclosures and environmental reporting. I'm here together with my colleague Ines, who is our policy director. First of all, I would like to thank to organizers for holding this webinar. I believe it's very timely, and I'm really happy that we will be able to learn from each other and hear the best case practices. And also, of course, the International Secretariat would be really grateful for any input and questions related to the guidance note and what information would you like us to include in it. So today I will be talking a bit about requirements 6.1 and 6.4. These are two requirements that are related to environmental reporting. But before jumping into the technical aspects, I want to talk a bit about the background, or why are we talking about environmental reporting. We could see that in the last couple of years, the demand for environmental information was growing in both on the global level and also on the local level. And also in case of EITI, many MSG members, especially civil society representatives and government representatives, they have environmental background and they would like to explore this topic more, especially with regards to the EITI. In addition, you could also see that it is quite high on our partners and donors agenda, and this aspect is becoming more and more relevant globally. Secondly, something that we paid attention to is that environmental aspect is quite often discussed in the framework of the local impact. As we all know that many extraction is happening in the regions, and it's interesting to look into how the communities are affected and whether all of the environmental obligations are followed in practice. And in late 2017, we produced a brief that covers different environmental practices in EITI implementing countries, and I highly suggest looking at that paper. It's available on our website. It might encourage MSGs on what information can be covered under environmental reporting. Also, you could look at our latest progress report and the one that will be soon launched for the 2020 that covers also some good practice examples. And as was already mentioned, in June 2019, we adopted a new 2019 standard that includes one brand new requirement on environmental management and monitoring, and also one of the requirements was a bit edited and refined to include also environmental reporting. I will briefly start by looking at requirement 6.1. On the left side of the slide, you can see the text of this requirement, which is, rather long and might be confusing at the first look. But I would like to break it down a bit. And basically here you can see that there are two main questions that the MSGs should ask. The first one, are there any material environmental payments in the country? And the second question is whether environmental payments are mandatory. And if you answer yes to both of these questions, so there are some payments that are material, they're significant, they're important, and they are mandatory according to the law, contracts, different regulations. Then requirement 6.1b applies, and countries are required to disclose these revenue streams. In case countries look at the environmental payments in the country, they see that they're material, but they are not mandatory according to the laws, regulations, or contracts, then such payments are just encouraged to be disclosed. So this is a simple formula that can be applied, and it's really good if countries could look at this aspect at the stage of the scoping or inception report to identify whether there are any environmental payments that should be covered in the EITI reporting. I would like to provide two examples here, and I think that even country representatives from Ukraine and Mongolia who can correct me if I'm making any mistake here. When you look at the 2016 Ukraine EITI report, you can see that environmental tax has been included in the reporting, even though it is not more than 1% of the total revenue streams. However, MSG members decided to not only include it, but also reconcile, because it is very important for local budgets and local communities. In the middle, you can see example of Mongolia. And in 2018 EITI report, they included different types of environmental payments, for example, environmental payments for environment protection and also different emission and pollution taxes. Altogether, they constitute approximately 3% of total revenues from the extractive industries, and the MSG found that it's also very important revenue streams for the local communities. On the right side of the presentation, you can see different types of environmental payments that we came across when looking at EITI implementing countries, and those are kind of the revenue streams that the MSGs can look at when doing the scoping phase or inception phase for their reports, and try analyzing whether those revenue streams are material and whether they are mandatory. Also, in the light of the current developments and the situation with the virus outbreak, and also the fluctuations or price fluctuations on the commodity market, it might be interesting for countries to look whether environmental payments have not decreased over the last year because of those developments. Of course, this raises a question of timeliness, since a lot of reports are 1 or 2 years old. However, this is an extra opportunity for MSGs to think about more timely reporting, maybe more systematic reporting. When it comes to requirement 6.4, this is a brand new requirement. It was not included in the 2013 or 2016 EITI standard. And I also would like to stress that this requirement is only encouraged. It is not required for countries to provide information on this aspect. However, at the same time, it is a great opportunity for the MSGs to discuss what aspects related to environmental management and monitoring are relevant for the country context. And if we look at the text of this requirement, it's at the bottom of the slide. It includes two main aspects. It's environmental management and also environmental monitoring. What are examples of the aspects that countries can look at? First of all, those are legal provisions and rules. So, for example, is there a specific law in the country that covers environmental payments? Or is this included in the subsoil code? So what is the regulations and the rules for the country, for the companies in the country? Secondly, countries can look at the relevant agencies. Is there a specific ministry or committee working on these particular aspects? Or are those incorporated in the tasks of the ministries of mines or energy? And thirdly, I think the most exciting part to look at is instruments. When it comes to the management, a lot of countries are already looking at environmental impact assessments, and in many cases, they are already even systematically disclosed. When it comes to monitoring, one of the most common instruments to analyze and look at is sanctions. So in case companies or government are not following their environmental obligations, what sanctions are in place to regulate it? Another way of looking at this requirement is also looking at the rules versus the actual practice. So what the government and companies are required to do and what they're doing it. And then again, when it comes to the current situation with the virus outbreak and drop in prices, might be interesting to analyze whether those regulations has changed somehow, or maybe in some cases they are not followed in practice. So that's something that the MSGs might consider to look at. And important aspect here as well is that a lot of this information is actually already disclosed through EITI reporting. A lot of countries provide some information about legal provisions or relevant agencies under requirement 2, and also some other aspects under requirement 5. So it's not totally new to many countries, and many countries have already included it in their previous EITI reports. Yes, when it comes to the guidance note, because that's something that I believe that many stakeholders are looking forward to, we are currently at the drafting stage, and we're looking at the time frame of the end of this year to produce the guidance note. And we, of course, would be very happy to hear any questions or feedback from the implementing countries and other stakeholders of what information they would like us to include in that guidance note to make sure that it's as useful as possible. Thanks a lot. That's all from my side.
Thank you, Alicia. With that, we will be going over to the two country cases that we had announced. I will directly give it over to you, Cielo, to talk about how you used environmental data in the Philippines.
Okay, hold on. Okay. While I'm for my slides, maybe just a quick overview of what happened in the EITI award. Basically, the Coalition Civil Society, especially me from Asia Pacific and South America, the Latin American, are very happy with the inclusion of environmental reporting in EITI. While it's only encouraged, we know that the first step to be a requirement in EITI is to be encouraged in terms of reporting. And I agree that there's huge demand from civil society and governments on environmental reporting. But I also would like to point out that investors are also looking at environmental reporting right now. A lot of companies are already doing voluntary environmental disclosures, like the global reporting initiatives, and these are not tripartite organizations or voluntary reporting that companies are doing. So the demand for environmental disclosures are coming from different sectors, and I think that's good. With respect to the experience of the Philippines, when we started our EITI, there was generally an agreement from all stakeholders, from the companies, the government, and the civil society, to disclose information beyond payments. When we joined in 2012, we're still using the EITI 2012 standards, so there were no requirements on environmental reporting. But in the case of the Philippines, the impact of mining on the environment and the society are very, very important to discuss when you look at the mining sector. So companies and governments willingly agreed to disclose information beyond what the standard is requiring. So at that time, we were able to already agree on disclosing environmental information. What the civil society did at the time is to map all payments that the companies are giving the government, including environmental payments, and all the disclosures required by laws in terms of environmental reporting. At the time, we're also able to agree on contracts disclosure. And as part of our argument, part of a contract or annexes, what we refer to as annexes are considered the rights given to companies. So when you get a contract, you get the right to use water, right to clear forests, land use rights. So all these rights must be disclosed, and that was the agreement in 2012. While all parties agreed, well, I think up to now there's still no complete disclosure of the information that we are demanding. Payments have been disclosed, but not the data. So what you see now in the slide is actually just a case study on what we can do if we actually disclose information from a civil society and community perspective. So this study that I worked with a graduate students from geology, we looked at what data are publicly available with respect to water, and we decided to do a case study of two large-scale companies in the Philippines doing mining. Our limitation is that we really actually want to just focus on what is publicly available. So what we did is to estimate the amount of water available in the community and how the operation of a mining company in a community is affecting the water supply of the company. So basically here we know how water is important to the mining sector because they use it in all aspects of their value chain. But at the same time, if they can continue extracting water, that affects economic activity and social activities of households in the community. So here's the Philippines. We're in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. So maybe some of you are wondering, how can we have water problems when we're in the middle of the ocean? So these are the two mines that we studied. This is the OceanaGold. It's Australian. It's operated by an Australian company. And this one is a Taganito nickel mine in the south, operated by a local company. So some of you may know the supply of water will be affected, of course, by the climate. Oops, sorry, what happened there? Climate, the type of geology, topography in the area. So depending on what kinds of soil is there, that will have an effect on the water supply in the area. So because of that, then even if we have lots of ocean water, and we will have problems in some areas in terms of water supply. So here, as I said, we only look at public data that are available. We got data about rainfall, stream flow of water in rivers, government agencies, and then the water use we got from the reports of mines, from their sustainability reports. As I said, the OceanaGold is an international company, so they're doing sustainability reports every year. Nickel Asia is a listed company, so it makes sense for them to do sustainability reports. We were hoping to do all these studies across companies operating in the Philippines, but really we're limited by the data, so we're only able to do analysis in these two companies. So this just a quick thing on how we did our analysis. It was actually very challenging because as I said, we're trying to estimate how much water is available in the community. So we have to estimate the supply of water by looking at the amount of flow in the surface water. We don't have the exact data from the area, but what we did is to look at other rivers with the same characteristic as the rivers in the two study areas, and then estimate the water flow. At the same time, we also estimated the groundwater. So we have information on the both areas of the DPO and Taganito. So we're able to estimate the groundwater, and then the complete water supply. We included the estimation. We included our model, the precipitation or the amount of rainfall that we get every year, and so we have the water supply. And then we compare it with the reported water use of companies. So what is actually very interesting in this study and what would be relevant to the community is, for example, in the case of Tidipio, this blue and red bar shows the average water supply that's available every year for the area, for the community. And the yellow and green are the water use. So for the DPO, they disaggregated their water use between surface and groundwater. So if you can see in 2018, they used more than 50% of the groundwater in the area. And what is interesting is during the same period, the community started complaining about water supply. And they're accusing the company, and the company is, of course, denying it. And now we have our study showing that, yeah, at the time, based on your report, your extraction of groundwater coincides with the problem that the community encountered in terms of water supply. In terms of the Taganito mine water extraction, it doesn't have that the same significant effect in terms of the water supply. So that's good. Aside from that, we also look at what are the other factors that may affect the water supply in the community. Of course, we cannot always just accuse the companies. We have to look at other factors that may affect. So we look at the population in the communities and try to project their growth over the years. We also looked at, based on existing reports of companies and their sustainability report, like how much of the area they've disturbed. So this is what they use in the operation, the orange bar. And then the green bar is the extent of rehabilitation in the area. So we also looked at the volume of production of the two companies. So the Taganito, the one in the south, only produces nickel, and the one in the north produces gold and copper. So, okay. So based on that, we have this principal component analysis. It's actually just correlation because we have very limited numbers of observation, around 3-4 years. And sorry, the the texts are very small, but the closer you are, the smaller the angle between the lines means they're more correlated. So in the case of the DPO, the correlation between the water use is strongly correlated with rehabilitation of the area and the development of the area. So when you have and of course rehabilitation is strongly correlated also with the volume of production. Let me cannot. Yeah, so the total water extraction is strongly correlated with a disturbed area and a rehabilitated area, not much on the volume of gold and copper produced. Of course, it makes sense because companies can just store the copper and the gold that they produce, and they don't necessarily sell it immediately. So we can see that their water extraction is correlated to that. With respect to Taganito, the one in the south, their water use is strongly correlated, positively correlated with their spending on environmental rehabilitation and also the volume of silt that they collect, meaning the dust that they produce. And then we also looked at, so moving forward, depending on the activities of the mine, how will it affect water use? So the blue line is when there's no problem in terms of operation. But like, for example, in the case of the DPO, if a mine accident happens, they will require huge amount of water to control the negative effect of those problems. So that's what the orange line is representing. In fact, based on our projection, by the end of the life of this mine, they will be requiring around 50% of the underground water in the area. So these are projections. These are analysis based on what we have in terms of data. But what we're seeing is it's better to have something like this than nothing at all. At least with data like this, we challenge the companies and the governments in terms of the information that they're presenting to the community, and they can actually improve the extent of monitoring and compliance of companies with existing laws and regulations. So in this case, I think the strongest item in our finding is that, yes, we found that at the time, when the community is experiencing drought and problems with water supply, it coincided with the period when the companies actually utilized more than 50% of underground water. And that event also coincides at the time when the company expanded its operation, decided to do underground mining for gold, and without an existing recycling facility. So after a year, after 2018, the water use of the DPO actually improved because that's when they started using a recycling facility. So here, our recommendation actually is in the future, we'll have better analysis and stronger findings if information are publicly available. And for EITI and EITI implementing countries, I don't think this will be a challenge because, as I said, this information are not only relevant to immediate stakeholders at the community level, these information are also relevant to investors, and they're very useful not only to make companies accountable, governments accountable, but also to make both the extractive sector sustainable and the communities and the environment sustainable. All right, thank you.
Thank you very much, Cielo. I think this was a very interesting example of how the data was used for a specific issue, but also how to build an argumentation basis for informed dialogue. I will now give it over to Cesar to present us how environmental data within the context of EITI was used, for what purpose it was used in the case of Peru. Yep, Cesar, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you. I don't know if I'm going to handle the presentation of you, but
I think you are able to.
Okay,
yes.
Cool.
Yes,
yeah, thank you. No, thank you so much for the opportunity to talk about the Peruvian experience on environmental transparency, how civil society, how the inclusion of environmental information disclosure in the EITI standard. So very briefly, my presentation has three parts about the context about this experience. I will explain later the relationship between the shadow report that we made and the Peruvian EITI national report 2015-2016, and then finally some conclusions. Well, very briefly, because we know what happened in the last 3 years in the private sector, not just in Peru but also in Latin America, and I think that it's relevant how the EITI can help and overcome the some impact of the private sector. I think that it's, especially the environmental concerns are very and a strong it's a strong demand from the local communities, and I think the effects of the private sector affect the governance. This is a matter that EITI wants to improve in the field, no, at policy level, and also with a global perspective. So it was very obvious that EITI may have to solve this problem of extractive sector governance, no? At least the environmental concern, right? And through the promotion of the transparency and provide more trust between the different stakeholders in the extractive sector. No? So one of these main issues or problematic and concern from local communities are the environmental issues, the environmental and social impact, and how the government or the private company handle the environmental payments. So I think that there are some precedents, yeah, because I think that civil society, governments, and private sector understood that problematic before the 2019 EITI standard. Certainly, not everybody may agree with that before the 2019 EITI standard. But I think that we have seen, as International Secretariat mentioned before, the International Secretariat prepared a report 3 years ago, and we found that 28 EITI countries reported environmental and social information. Yes. Also, if we assess the requirement 6, the other one that included disclosure of social payment, so depending on each country and regulation, this requirement already includes the disclosure of environmental information. And then finally, as Cielo mentioned before, the civil society, especially Latin America civil society organization, prepare and sign a letter signed by 140 civil society organizations asking for the inclusion of the environmental requirement in the EITI standard. So to talk more about the Peruvian case, I think that how the environmental information was included in the EITI national report. I think that Peru has been living in a strong commitment related to transparent public information, especially from the private sector in the last decade or 2 decades. Right now, Peru is member of the OGP initiative. Peru promotes the United Nations Guiding Principle on Business Human Rights, signed the CASU agreement, and is member of the EITI since 2005. There are a good effort, but we're not enough to satisfy the local demand to know about the environmental impact of each operation, how the company mitigate these impacts, and the public agency, how they monitor these obligations that companies should meet. So I want to raise that the inclusion of environmental information in the EITI national report came from especially an agreement of the Peruvian regime. So there wasn't a common consensus between government, civil society, and the private sector to include this information voluntarily. The MHG assumed that this commitment during the first phase of validation process 3 years ago. So I think that this is the beginning of this process. You know, I think that it's necessary, obviously, that the MHG discuss that and assume a strong commitment on that. So you can see in these charts all information that the EITI national report 2015-2016 include in the context part or in the baseline of the report. And it's important to say that the civil society played a key role in this process to collect information, to try to fill the lack of the systematization of environmental information. So this started in 2016 during the EITI Global Conference, where civil society from different regions decided to promote the disclosure of environmental payments in the EITI standard. In the state of Peru, the civil society started working in a shadow report to collect first environmental information, identifying the priorities of this information that we need to include in the national reports. We organized, I don't know, many workshops to collect this information, to talk to the Peruvian governments, different environmental agencies to select all this information, to process and systematize. Obviously, all this information was public, was presented by public website. For example, the status and the proceedings of the environmental licenses, how many licenses were approved, or are pending to approve. And it was a long process of systematization of information, and I think it was very useful to include in the EITI National Report 2015-2016. So you can see in this chart the result of this systematization, not only environmental information that we as civil society request, but I think it's a tremendous effort to do that and to repeat in the next reports. So, okay, so I don't want to mention the whole content of this part of the chapter of the EITI National Report of Peru, but I think we can sum up some part of that, the list of the content of this environmental information, that, and we can split in at least in 4 parts or 5 parts. The first one, we include all the normative or regulation or institutional aspect of environmental management, the data from environmental licenses and environmental monitor reports from the different environmental agencies, the information on cases of environmental and social conflicts that the government is in that moment handled. The social payments, obviously, that has a strong link to the environmental payments, and the free, prior, and informed consultation process in the extractive sector. So all this information was public and is public, was systematized by the MSG, but with the civil society support. I think it was not enough, but it's a first, at least, step. I know that recent dialogues in Peru about the definition of social payments, mandatory and non-mandatory, and environmental payments, and a good start too. And I think it's a challenge to define environmental payment, and it depends in each country. But following the Peruvian example, I think that the countries can start to meet the new requirements 6.1. Yeah. About the pre-prime consultation right, I think Peru has been taken as an example of a country that promotes prior consultation and tries to reach agreement with indigenous people in the last decade. It has not been easy for Peru. No? There have been challenges and missed opportunities in the past, but the EITI can learn from this lesson. And I think the challenge for the EITI is to better define the impacts at local level and to expand the initiative to go beyond the MSG space, no? The MSG room. So a good step is that many countries that have indigenous people and have signed 169 ILO Convention, and there have some social conflict that the overlapping between indigenous lands and the extractive operation have to recognize the speed right and to apply it, and it's a source of information to try to solve the environmental social impact of extractive operation. So the incorporation of the speed right in the EITI national report is necessary, I think so. So finally, to finish my briefly presentation, I should run the whole one. I think I would like to raise just one conclusion. No? I think it's important to pick up the whole information about environmental payments and environmental impacts, because this is a local demand that many not just indigenous people, but local communities ask to the extractive sector. And I think that the guideline or the methodology that should define at least 4 main topics. No? The baseline of environmental information, unified and different from different environmental agencies, private sector, even civil society has this systematized. No? I think that mitigation measures and funds payments to support those obligations provided by environmental agencies should be included in this standard. in the future guidelines that the international secretary has to prepare. Also, the environmental payments sources and how the governments use that is a good step to include the concept of the contributions, mandatory contributions made by the private sector to strengthen the environmental monitoring agency. And finally, the information provided by the environmental monitoring agency to know how the operation mitigation measures and environmental payments should be included in the official guideline that the international secretariat has to prepare. Well, thanks a lot, and sorry for I have to run for the presentation.
Okay, great. So we have looked at the requirement itself through a presentation from the EITI Secretariat, and both Cielo and Cesar have presented how the environmental aspects have been aligned with priorities in the Philippines as well as in Peru. So there were questions of water consumption, water availability, but also environmental data disclosures being an entry point as well for questions of participation in FPIC. So we're at the end of the presentation part of the webinar. I'm looking to the left. I see one question. I wanted to, maybe we can take one or two questions before we move to the last part of gathering your input. Is there any other question aside from our colleague, Lothar Rast? Okay.
Yes, I have. It's Francisco Barris from the Secretariat. I have a question for Cesar.
Please go ahead.
Okay. One is, from the current disclosure you have managed to include in the EITI report and by your own work in DAR, this shadow report has been used to identify gaps to push for a specific action on with the agencies in charge of this. That is let's say, first question. And the second, more forward-looking, is how are you planning to include this in the EITI, let's say, systematic disclosure effort toward the future? There, you can pull this information from the agency like SENACE or UEFA or other, systematize most of this information toward the future.
Okay. Cesar, do you want to go ahead and answer this question before then I read the question that was in the chat box?
Okay, yeah, sure. So I think that according to my experience, because my organization is part of the, not just the EITI International Board, but the Peruvian MSG, and also we are representative from civil society in the subnational level too, in the MSG in Loreto. I think that in a good discussion in the MSG, but also in a public discussion too, is about the not just the social payments, if they are mandatory or not, but also how we are going to define the environmental payments. And one of these, I don't know, challenge to do that is, for example, and I think that the Peruvian case overcome is about the contributions that the private sector, the company, has to pay or to give to strengthen the environmental agencies, like an UEFA, that is the agency that is in charge to monitor how the company met their environmental obligations, and also if they fail, they have to put sanctions. So I think all this field is in a challenge, and I think that the most important thing that the MSG is discussing that they overcome that, and they include. I think that I know that they include in the next EITI national report. And I don't remember the second question, but we can move forward if you want.
Okay. I think the second question was also about the systematic disclosure, but I'll read off also the question from our colleague from Mexico. His question is, if there is no legal requirement for firms to disclose specific environmental information, are there specific information that those case studies or other countries consider particularly useful or necessary? I think I'll open this up for either Cesar or
Yeah,
Cielo.
okay, very briefly. I think that it depends on each country. I mentioned that before, but in the case of Peru, and I know a little bit about the environmental international principles. Most of the information that are related to the, for example, environmental licenses in most of the countries is public. So when you assess the environmental impact assessment, the environmental license, all the information that the company provides to the government because the government has to approve, they include a plan to mitigate the environmental and social impact. So how they are going to do that? They have to finance that. So they have to pay. I think that the most important result, at least for me, is the environmental license, and the second one is the information that the environmental agency that monitor the environmental obligations of the companies has to provide also to the EITI national report. I know that there are some limitation binding obligations in some countries to protect, for example, the commercial rights of the companies, but this is a challenge we need to change.
Thanks. Cielo, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, well, I agree with Cesar. For sure, there are legal requirements in terms of environmental compliance that companies are required to follow. They're attached to the contracts, and the feasibility study is a very important document because it gives you the baseline information on the extent of the operation of a company. And then what is important after that would be the annual reports that governments surely require companies. The example that I gave with respect to water, but I can imagine, for example, it'll be good to see the extent of disturbance that the companies are doing, the amount of trees being cut, and if there are accidents, the extent of damage that happen, and cost-benefit analysis can be done. Like, for example, to estimate the cost of damage and how much they're really compensating government and communities with respect to the damage. So, because right now I shifted my hat already. I used to be part of the Philippine MSG, but now I'm not part of the MSG. I'm a data user, so I get excited every time there's new disclosure. And the reason why I did this case study is just to be able to present the extent of analysis that we can do with the data that's available. And this is not even based on the disclosure of companies in the EITI Philippines. These are information done through sustainability reports and through weather stations in the country. So imagine if we have more data that will be disclosed. And I believe this information that we are actually demanding in the EITI, albeit just encouraged, are already existing data that governments are supposed to be collecting from companies. And the companies that have committed to disclose this information when they've signed a contract with the government. So yeah. So these are all relevant information so that it'll be easier for communities and government to monitor the operation of companies.
Thanks. I'll come to the final question. How can EITI address the attempts of national or federal governments to reduce or weaken state monitoring or regulation of extractive activities, especially in the light of pandemics like COVID-19? I don't know, Alicia, you had also talked about COVID-19 earlier. Do you want to address this question?
I can just start on it. I think it's a very interesting question, and that's something that would be exciting if some of the countries would look into it. I think at this stage, what can be done within the EITI is basically getting this information and maybe publishing this information about what are the current environmental regulations and management and monitoring procedures, and whether they have changed somehow since the virus outbreak. And then, of course, there can be done some advocacy campaign in countries and also on the local level. So that's something that the basics that can be done in this situation, I believe.
Kim, can I add to that?
Sure.
Coming from coming from a public finance perspective, I'm actually worried that a lot of the developing countries right now who are affected by COVID will be pressured to actually raise a lot of money to be able to respond to the social protection needs of many individuals and communities affected by the pandemic. But the question now is that a lot of countries also might get tempted to enter into agreements with companies to be able to raise money. And right now is not the time to weaken government monitoring or regulation. Because even if we are in a pandemic, I think it's not time to weaken institutions. It's actually time to strengthen institutions so that the next time we have a pandemic, institutions will be better off or will be more effective in responding to this pandemic. And I think civil society and communities have to be very wary, very attentive, and should assert participation and accountability in the extractive sector, because we don't want governments entering into contracts that may make countries better off, make countries worse off in the long run, just because we need to raise money to address the needs of a pandemic at this time.
Thanks. I think this is maybe a good point, also a segue into the next section, where we're looking for guidance, and guidance also means that we sometimes look to share experience on these questions. And I think time will also show, how this question is addressed in different countries in different ways. In the interest of time, I'll move to the last part of the webinar. So we've prepared 4 guiding questions that would help also the Secretariat gather some input from implementing countries as well as partners who are assisting them on what types of information is expected in a useful guidance note. And so we'll be projecting 2 questions at a time in the remaining time. And what you'll be able to do is you can actually directly go on this screen that's projected. And for each of the questions underneath, when you hover over the type here part, you'll see a little text box where you can type in your input just as we go now. You can also go on the right and you'll see a little A with a box. When you click on it, you can add another text box into the screen. And so this will help us gather input in the remaining time that we have. So the first 2 questions would be interested to know, so we've looked at Peru and the Philippines, but we'd be interested to know from other countries as well within the past year, especially since the adoption of the new standard, for what purposes they have used the requirement on environmental reporting, what kind of priorities they have been addressing. And the second question would be, what kind of challenges or unclarities have you encountered in your implementation, for which we would be looking for clarity in the guidance note. So we'll leave this little box for a couple of minutes, so those who want to type in can type in. And at the end of this webinar, we'll leave you an email address just in case you have other thoughts after the webinar that you didn't think of right now. So feel free to type in, don't be shy. If you have any technical issues, please let us know. And we'll hopefully be able to help you type in your answers. Okay, we see some colleagues are still typing. We'll leave these questions for another few seconds, and then we'll go over to the remaining two questions that we have prepared. I think someone's still typing.
Hello. Question. We don't know how to post it. Can we read the question to you?
Sure, yeah, or you can, oh, okay, please do.
Because we're not sure how to post it.
You can also put it in the chat box if that is easier. But yes, please do.
Okay, the EITI standard section 6.4 created, Lisa, something went on, it left a message. Oh, yes, out now, it's the chat box, created a loophole by using the word encourage, because this word allows the interpretation to delay or create an option of when to implement. It's not mandatory. So we are confused. On the one hand, the Oslo is saying they want us to implement, but on the other hand, they use the word encourage. In Trinidad, the word encourage has adopted a literal meaning. So environmental data is not being disclosed fully.
Thank you. I think you actually managed to type that into the whiteboard. We did see it, and we've noted that went down as a feedback. Yes, we have that captured.
And last year, we went to great effort to create an environmental template in which we spent several months preparing it, and it was sent to the steering committee several months prior to its finalization, and no one objected. And then a week before publication of our document, we were told that they did not have the budget to include it in the report. So civil society said we would pay for including it, and then they came and said that, you know, it's only being encouraged. It's not a mandatory report. So we were hit for six, as we say in the cricket world.
Okay, just before I answer to you, just quickly, we have put up the next two questions. Same logic, please feel free to type in any feedback that you have. The third question is, what kind of guidance do you expect or need? Which links to the second question that we had posted. And then the final question, are there any countries today present who would be wanting to share the examples or to be considered by the guidance note? I apologize, we're going a little over time, but we will end before 3:05, hopefully. Thank you, sir. And to the colleague who, from Trinidad, you had asked the question on encourage and requirement. I mean, since we have the Secretariat on the call as well, maybe you would seek some clarification directly, Olesia or Ines. I don't know if you wanted to maybe clarify also just again on the different types of requirement levels.
Hi, this is Alessa. Indeed, when it comes to requirement 6.4 in the 2019 standard, it is encouraged. It's not required at this stage, and it's a totally new requirement for many countries. So we want countries to explore what they can disclose under this requirement, and then when it comes to, as I understand, like advocacy and basically trying to implement it and maybe making it more mandatory in the country, I think that I encourage you to talk to the country team, and we will try together to understand how better we can support you in this aspect.
Okay, thank you. Seeing that nobody is typing into these last two questions, I'm assuming that the input was already captured maybe by question number 2. Like I said, if there are any questions afterwards that come up, feel free to contact us. I think the Secretariat will be looking on a continuous basis to receive input from you. Before we close the webinar, we would also like if you want to come back to certain parts again. Thank you very much. I wish you a good start into the week, and yeah, hope to see you soon.